Alrighty everyone, hello, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how you can understand the four elements and bring them further into your kitchen witchcraft practice. By the way, if you want to see these videos 2 weeks earlier, consider subscribing to my Patreon, where you not only get all these videos, but also recipe cards, specific deity profiles, and lots of other interesting things to look at. Video tiers start at $10 a month, so definitely consider checking it out. So when we're in the kitchen, we're most often thinking about like herbs, spices, actual fruits and vegetables. We may not be thinking about where else we can actually find the elements within not just the food, but the kitchen itself, right? So of the four elements, I definitely think we should get started with fire, talking about where we can see this within our hearth, our home, and our kitchen. So some basic stats on fire. Fire is the element associated with Archangel Michael, who is also the guardian of the element of South. It is an element that is associated with Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, which are ruled by the planets Mars, the Sun, and Jupiter, respectively. Alchemically, it is represented by just a regular right-side-up triangle. In tarot, this is also associated with the suit of wands, which is a suit all about creative energy, passion, go-getters, project starting, all these kinds of things, right? Luck and optimism, mainly in action. And it's no surprise that those things follow along with those three planets that rule the three astrological signs. When it comes to fire, it is very much about life, energy, action, and power. And you're going to see that not only in all of these associations, but in a lot of the common foods, herbs, and spices that make up the fire element altogether. Let's take a look. As you might notice, a lot of your kitchen, in terms of ingredients, is actually going to be of the fire element. Whether it's something like a tea with ginger and cinnamon in it, whether it's something like a really solid goulash where there's a lot of onions involved, or a curry where there's a lot of really warming spices, fire honestly makes up a large part of the magic we're going to do in the kitchen and has a lot to do with exactly what those planets signify. Success, luck, expansion, creation, all these other kinds of great things. So in actually just the ingredients alone, with fire, you can get a lot out of the actual ingredients you're using. But there's more to it than that too. I would honestly suggest you not only look at these ingredients you can use, but also the fire itself in your kitchen. This is most obvious if you have a gas stove, which actually creates flame, but even an induction stove or one of those wire heaters is still going to contribute real heat, and I would hope so, or else your food wouldn't cook. The stove as a unit and an appliance also in modern times represents where there used to be a fireplace, right? People used to cook on those open fires or those stone ovens and those stone hearths, and that's where all of the family would center around too, especially in the winter. When you look back in the olden days, you'll see goddesses like Greek Hestia, like Roman Vesta, like Celtic Brigid, who all have something to do with the sacred flame. And it's more than just a flame, right? It also signifies the very heart of the house, the place where the whole family gathers for warmth and for social activity, where food is made that keeps everyone alive, and where all of these domestic activities kind of culminate into their real purpose, which is to keep the family together. Hestia, for instance, wasn't just someone who presided over fire in general. She was someone who provided over both municipal fires, right, in like state temples and other public spaces, and also the hearth of the home. She presided over cooking the meals, baking the bread. She was someone who was in every single person's kitchen and also in every single temple to any god, because that fire and that social connection that it brings was so important. Even in the Bible, if the mentions of fire aren't the most cozy associations we know, they still do have a very transformative action. For instance, in Matthew, actually, where John is describing Jesus who's coming along, where John is baptizing with water, John says that the one coming after him is going to baptize in the Holy Spirit and fire. He's going to separate the wheat from the chaff, and he's going to burn up that chaff in unquenchable fire. A lot of people read this to mean punishment or bad things, but really there is a very transformative and purifying aspect to fire, especially throughout its mention in the Bible. People's sins being stripped away by fire. Does it hurt? Yes. Is it scary? Sure. But it's still meant to be a transformative thing, a cleansing thing, a purifying thing. And in fact, God in the Book of Enoch is described as the one who burns so hot he burns cold. And even in Exodus, his glory is represented by great fire. He's descending down in fire onto the mountain to meet Moses. So fire has a lot of those associations of, purging, right? Purging in that purifying way of power, of might, and of life, especially. It brings life, warmth, light, all these things. And when you invoke it into your kitchen, you can get some of those protections not only in a positive way, but in a baneful way, right? If you think of onions and garlic. And you can also get a lot of that power, that passion, that luck. There is such a thing as the phrase lighting a fire under your ass for a reason, right? So on and so forth. Fire is probably the easiest thing you're going to find when it comes to doing magic of an elemental sort in your kitchen. Next we have water, and water is the complete opposite of fire in a lot of ways, right? Whereas fire is kind of tough and rough, water is very gentle and very nurturing. And when we look at its basic associations, we can see that. So for basic stats, water is associated with Archangel Gabriel, who is the defender of the direction west. On top of that, it is associated with the zodiac signs Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, as well as the Moon, Mars or Pluto, and Neptune, respectively. In tarot, it's associated with the Suit of Cups, which is all about love, friendship, intuition, emotional sensitivity, and subconscious feelings, which is exactly what these planets and especially these signs have to do with. Alchemically, it's also the upside-down triangle. And let's take a look at the common herbs, spices, and fruits and vegetables you're going to find when it comes to water. As you can see, a lot of these have either very high water content, like cucumbers and tomatoes, or they tend to be sweet things and, kind of fruity, floral things, right? A lot of flowers, a lot of fruits like apples and plums and raspberries. These things are very much good for all kinds of friendship, for love, for romance and beauty and, building relationships, for building kinship with people, for purification and cleansing, which once again connects them to all of those planets and zodiac signs and other associations that water holds. And a side note for water, a lot of these things and these ingredients are also associated with Venus, but you'll notice that Venus is a planet associated with love, with beauty, with friendship, all these kinds of things, and that's what water is about. That's why you can see Venus both in the water representations here in a lot of these, and you can also see it happen in a lot of the more earth-based things too. I mean, in mythology, if you look at water, from the primordial waters of Abrahamic religions in Genesis, to Sumerian gods of the water, to all these other gods of rivers and lakes and rains, it's a life-giving thing, but also potentially a destructive thing, a very destructive thing. Floods, even lack of rains, all these other kinds of things, they can really destroy as much as they can harbor life. Water is something that has that duality, so depending on what you're trying to do, you absolutely could either bless or curse a meal, depending on where your thoughts are going. Just remember that muddy thoughts definitely mean muddy water. And of course, there is a very important aspect of water magic that will show up in your kitchen the most when you are making something that has a water base. Water as a type of magic, water magic, is very much rooted in healing and purifying and cleansing. So things like lemon and stuff, you can see that, but also when you make a good bowl of tomato or even chicken soup, those are the standard classic meals for when you are sick or just feeling kind of down. They're comforting, they are full of nutrients, they are very satisfying, and they're easier on the stomach if you're sick and you can't really keep that much down. This is where we also see a bit of an intersection with the magical and the mundane too, right? It's healing so much because when you make a broth or a soup of some kind, a lot of the things you are steeping in it take up all of those vitamins and minerals and other nutrients that, were in all of those ingredients you used. It's quite literally like making tea into a meal. When you make a soup, it's like a bowl of tea. Think about it. But in the kitchen, water is very important, right? Water is the thing that keeps the ingredients in your pot from burning. Once you cook all the water out of the onions, they are going to burn. So whether you have a sauce or a soup or anything like that, water is what prevents everything from just getting scorched, and it gives time for flavors to marry in the actual meal itself. Next up, we have Earth, and this one is honestly kind of difficult to find in the kitchen when it comes to actual foods, which you wouldn't think because everything comes out of the ground, so you would assume a lot of it is earth-based to some extent, especially because so much of it is green. However, the one place you can really be sure to find solid earth energy is in root vegetables like beets and potatoes, and in grains. Rye, barley, buckwheat, regular wheat, corn. These things are going to have a lot of that earthy energy because they are based on that kind of abundance and fertility and other such things. But some basic stats for Earth: it is associated with the archangel Uriel in the direction of north. Alchemically, it's represented by the upside down triangle with a line through it, and it's associated with the zodiac signs Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, which are ruled by Venus, Mercury, and Saturn respectively. Earth is also associated with the suit of coins in tarot, which is all about having the finer things in life, right? Like you'll see with Venus again. But unlike Venus's associations with love and friendship in the water side, here in Earth, they represent the love of the finer things, right? All of that beauty and things that come through the material comforts, the aesthetic of your home and other such things. This is one of the big associations with Taurus. They also represent responsibility, right? Like adulthood, paying your taxes, getting things done. They are all about efficiency and material wealth and stability, especially stability. I know I already rattled off a few, but if we take a look at some of the things associated with Earth, as you can see, again, it's a lot of grains and it's a lot of very kind of hearty little herbs, right? And this is pretty clear. Back in the day, your food stability depended on how much grain you could bring in. Agricultural societies were very heavy on grains. I mean, it's not like we don't have whole holidays about this, right? We got Lughnasadh, which is a Celtic holiday dedicated to the god Lugh, and that's where you kind of give the first part of the harvest to him in August. Later in Christian times, we have Lammas or Lophmas, which is on the same day. Or in Southern Europe, we have the Feast of the Assumption a couple weeks later, and these are still both harvest festivals. We also have goddesses like Demeter, where everyone knows the story of how in her grief for her daughter, she just kind of basically had the land go barren. And when that happened, people had a real chance of dying out because there was no reliable food source. When it comes to winter, north, earth, and things like this, you know, as we look at Uriel, the thing is, you need shelf-stable food. And that is exactly what things like potatoes, beets, and grains are, right? You can keep grains and grain flours for a very long time. Potatoes stay in a cool storeroom for months. And beets and other things like carrots and garlic, they actually get better when you let them stay in the ground over winter. The process of overwintering is said to make beets and carrots sweeter, and it gives garlic those distinctive cloves that we all know and love. But another place you might think to find earth is not only in the ingredients in these grains, but also in your cookware. If you have wooden spoons or clay and stone pots, that's another source of the earth element, right? You have that wood of the trees, you have the stone and clay of the ground, the rock. This is another place where by baking something in a stone vessel, you can incorporate some of that earth power, some of that stability, sturdiness, right? That hardiness, resilience. You can infuse all of that into the food by the vessel you're cooking it with. And we all know that a spoon is basically just a wand, so if you have a good spoon that you really like, you can enchant it with those earth-like properties, prosperity, stability, resilience, and you can just kind of go to town. That way, anything you cook is going to have a really nice aspect to it, no matter what ingredients you're using. And lastly, we have air, which is admittedly a bit difficult too to find in the kitchen like earth. There are a lot of nuts and other things that are associated with air, and there are also some really common herbs, but other than that, where you're going to find it is really up to how creative you can get. But some quick stats on air first. Air is represented by Archangel Raphael, who oversees the direction of east. It's associated with zodiac signs Libra, Gemini, and Aquarius, which are also represented by Venus, Mercury, and Uranus, respectively. And I know you've seen Venus show up a couple times already, but it does rule over Libra, which is fair and balanced, right? It's all about fairness, balance, and not really, overlooking justice. Fair communication, open communication, these things are important to an air sign. You'll also see this in Gemini, where being able to talk and express oneself under Mercury's influence is really important. And in Aquarius, with Uranus being that more abstract thought, that more, higher cerebral, intellectual energy, it's much the same. Aquarians are known for being very detached from emotion and nonsense and really just trying to focus on progress, efficiency, and getting to the future. And let's talk about that with these common herbs and spices. So as you can see, a lot of these things here, they're actually pretty famous for some specific qualities. Bergamot, for example, is a fantastic item when it comes to studying. It's associated with memory, with knowledge and intellect, and a lot of people in the Middle Ages would actually have bergamot in their tea in order to study, which is really interesting. Other herbs too, like mint, are also really, really good for enhancing mental power. So when it comes to actual foods, I won't lie to you. Some of the easiest things you can do is just make a cup of Earl Grey tea while you study. Or, if you're having a kind of party thing, you can put together a little mixed nut platter because so many nuts are associated with air. This is especially good if you're having a professional function or something where you really want to be on your A game with communication and intellect, so long as no one's allergic to nuts. That is important. But, all of the ingredients aside, one of the most important places you're going to find air in the kitchen is yourself. Whether it is the creation myth of Genesis, where God breathes life into Adam, whether it is pretty much the same kind of story among Odin and the Norse gods in the Norse religion. The breath of life is transcultural. It is across so many different cultures because the idea of breath being connected so intimately with life is pretty much universal. We cannot live if we cannot breathe. And one of these things in magic that you really need to make sure you understand is how important it is to be calm and collected, right? So even if you're just centering yourself with some anxiety breathing techniques, right, where you breathe in and you hold it and you breathe back out, that can help a lot. That can absolutely center you while you're trying to gather your thoughts, gather your intentions, and focus your magic. It makes you a lot more intentional as you cook and as you breathe over your food. There's also your overhead fan, which you might not think to look for when you are cooking, but in fact is actually pretty important. The overhead fan keeps your whole hood here from getting like super gross when you have all of this moisture coming out of your pot. It also keeps the whole place from stinking like onions. If you don't turn on your overhead fan, your whole house will stink like onions, and nobody likes this. So air, right, think about it, it's a circulating force. It moves and it flows and it keeps all of that energy not stagnant, right? That's the last thing we want, is stagnant energy or everything just sitting on top of you all heavy. Air moves that around, keeps things fluid, keeps things going. And another thing actually is that air and earth work really well together in tandem in something like bread. If you are baking bread, of course you might think that, yup, this is an earth-based item. Bread is full of wheat, it's full of rye, it's full of all other kinds of grains. Great, right? But without air, you will quite literally only have earth in your bread, and by that I mean you will have an inedible rock. When you are making a bread, the 4 ingredients involved in it, flour, water, salt, and yeast, are extremely important, and yeast is where air comes in. The reason bread rises is because the yeast will actually eat up all of the sugars in the flour, and as it eats it will make CO2. That gas is what causes those bubbles to happen in dough, and it's also why it's so satisfying to punch it down when it gets really big. But also, when you finally do bake the bread, all of that yeast, as it dies from the heat, it will release even more air, and that's what causes your bread to puff up so nicely. Whereas the gluten in all of the grains give it structure, that air gives it lift, and it makes it go from something that's kind of squat and dense and heavy to pick up to something that is squishy, light, fluffy, and not something you're going to chip your tooth on. So even if they are opposite elements, they absolutely work together to give you the best product, just like fire and water work together to not only make sure you don't burn things, but to give you the time to get all flavors married together, right? Just remember that when you cook, all elements are always there. There is never a time where you don't have any one of these elements going on. Whether it's the wood in your spoon as you stir something, whether it's the water and the flour and the yeast all working together in some dough, whether it's the fire of the stove itself. All of these things are always present, and that's what it really means to be having a truly magical ecosystem where all of the elements are there. They imbue your food with life and power and energy. They keep you grounded and stable and remind you of what you have. They keep you in your head and not drowning in your feelings. But they also don't let you get too detached from your feelings either, especially when it's time to serve up cookies or other kinds of tea with a good host of friends. It requires a balance of all elements and all of their meanings to really have a full and clear understanding of what you are doing in the heart of your house. And that's why not only is the food in kitchen witchcraft so magical, but the very space you do it in is also just as magical. So I hope that helps you guys think a little bit more about what's going on with elements in kitchen magic, and we will see you next time for a new episode on creating meals. See ya!